Joining us now is Mike Braun, seeking the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate here in Indiana. So why you? Why are you the best candidate to represent Indiana in the U.S. Senate?
Get asked that all the time, and I think the main reason is that I've built my career in the private sector, kind of where you live in the trenches of conservatism, and I think my two opponents have clearly been in politics for a career, and I think really if you're going to go to Washington and be a true reinforcement for President Trump, I think you got to draw on those experiences that have put you in the real world, and I think I contrast best with Joe Donnelly when it's someone actually takes him on, and I think my two opponents, have built that career in politics, and I am building a business from a very small one in my hometown into one that hovered around 17 employees or for 15, 20 years, built it into a national one over 37 years, and we now have 850 employees, do business across the country, and 3 of my 4 kids work in the business, and it's just been a dream come true in your hometown, and you run into so many things that you have to deal with in terms of politicians and bureaucrats. Got to California 5 years ago. It took that long to expand our business that direction, and didn't think there could be a place more complicated than dealing with the federal government. And you find out there might be. But living through it, I won't have to be briefed on the issues when I get to Washington. I'm going to know them. And I think my two opponents in the primary and Joe Donnelly, when you spend a career in politics, you've got to be, first of all, responsible for the issues we're dealing with, and I don't think you've got the right background to deal with them in the first place.
One of the big issues that a lot of folks are talking about is this issue of gun violence. We've seen a mass fatal shooting in Parkland, Florida. We saw the shooting in Las Vegas. So because of those issues, a lot of other things pop up so far as, should we do gun control? Should we ban this weapon or that weapon? And then what should we do about school safety? So let's break that down. On the issue of this discussion about whether we should be limiting guns in the sense of AR-15s and assault weapons, what are your thoughts on that and bump stocks? And then let's talk about school safety.
Whenever you have a tragic incident like that, of course, it's going to be discussed. And I think each time we too easily kind of reflex to trying to infringe on the Second Amendment rights when the causes, are not that. I don't like the solution where you'd come up with rules and regulations that are going to encompass everyone, law-abiding citizens. But on the other hand, you mentioned some very valid issues like school security. I know here in Indiana, we've led on that and are ahead of the curve. And I think that is valid. We need to make sure that first line of defense is in place to where schools are secured properly. When it comes to law enforcement, I think we saw some issues in watching what happened in Florida, where we need to get better at that. Have to be able to connect between any mental illness and access to guns. So I think we learned a whole lot, and I think we need to focus on those issues and not reflexively go to trying to infringe upon Second Amendment rights.
So clarify that for me so we know exactly where you stand, because as you know, I came at you with a specific question about the AR-15 and the bump stocks. Do you want to see limitations of that, or do you think it's clarify that for me so we're clear and that no one says, oh, just the media trying to, I'm not trying to stir anything up. So make sure that your position is clear.
I think that takes us down the road to we're infringing upon Second Amendment rights, and I would want to look at all other areas, including the ones we've looked at first before we go there.
Another big issue is that of immigration. It impacts all 50 states. There's the big issue of DACA, the issue of building the wall, the issue of sending National Guardsmen. As you know, President Trump wants to send Guardsmen, and that is already underway to do that. What are your thoughts on this issue? Because this is something that really impacts business, it impacts national security.
Business, national security, and President Trump has made that one of his main issues to deal with, and I think that's unfolding in front of us now. But all the problems associated with DACA, sanctuary cities, visa lotteries, all of that stems from the fact that we've got a border that's been disrespected for many, many decades. And I think until you secure the border, build the wall, it's silly to talk about trying to correct these other things because you've not gotten at the source of the problem. I think once we do that, when we know we've got border security in place, then you start tackling all the associated problems with it. And I think you do that fairly and openly. I mean, we're a country built on immigration. It just can't be to where it comes in willy-nilly and illegally. I think that's been going on for so long, and now we got a problem that's very large, and it's going to take a while to, sift through it. But I think it's got to begin with border security.
But be specific. Do you support the military on the border?
I do. I actually support what President Trump has done. Good. Because it's been done by prior presidents,
sure.
Number one.
It's nothing new.
And I think that when you get to any problem that has gotten this large and complicated, you got to use all the resources at your disposal. And I think, if nothing else, it shows that he means business with this issue, and it's the start of getting some of the other things he was looking for, funding for security and a wall.
And you support the wall?
I do.
Full funding, because what Congress wanted to do was just for a year or two. It's not the full funding.
Yeah, and I do because it simply has not worked with all the other methods that we've tried. So I think here, especially starting in high traffic areas, we need to start doing that, because we need to tell everyone that this border is secure, and people have not been paying attention to it, and I think it's important.
How about DACA? Because those folks already have been vetted
yep.
extremely. If they don't pass rules and regulations, they can be sent back.
And I think that's the top priority, and I think that's a bipartisan issue, but I don't think you start on that until we know the border is going to be secure.
As you came to the studio today, I'm sure you hit one or two, or maybe three or four, maybe even 7 potholes. Infrastructure, roads, bridges are not only crumbling in Indianapolis.
Right.
It's Minnesota, Arizona, Texas, California. You go anywhere this time of year, and just the roads and bridges are not doing too well. Where do we get the funding? Because we often hear that both sides, both Republicans and Democrats, they want to build stuff. Everyone wants to build. They want to put people to work. But do we have the money, sir?
Well, that's the easy part of it, saying something needs to be done. Like in building a business, the hardest part is always how are you going to finance it, how are you going to pay for it. In the real world, you got to trade off other resources. So you can't do what our federal government has done for anything, is where they keep spending and spending more than what they have, putting debt on future generations. That's not going to work. I think that's hit the wall where that method is hurting, and that's why I think states like ours, Indiana, ought to be proud of what we've done, to where we address that head on. And we're now probably the envy of the rest of the country, because we've got something in place that addresses what, for Indiana being the crossroads of America, it's our comparative advantage. We've got to make sure that our infrastructure is in good shape. It's no different than in many businesses. You always put off the most expensive, the big ticket items. But if you really have a good business, you account for that within the cash flows that you've got. Just like Indiana did, in a way that we operate with a balanced budget. We've got cash reserves, and we also knew the difference between spending money on something that is going to get consumed versus something that's tangible. So, and we listen to what President Trump said about infrastructure. He realizes that the federal government isn't in a position like Indiana would be, because they've lived a different kind of life. We will be the benefit of what infrastructure funding does come from the federal government, because he's talking about a matching plan very similar to what we did in Indiana with our counties and cities with community crossings. So,
but should we spend the money if we don't have the money? In other words, or do we invest? Because sometimes, as you know, you have to spend money to make money. So
Indiana has actually done the right thing, to where we've got the funds out for several years to get the ball rolling, to where we start actually repairing our roads, doing high priority new projects. Thank goodness. The federal government, I signed a pledge to never raise revenue at the federal level. It's not.
That's a hard pledge to keep.
And I'm going to stick with it.
George Bush 41 tried that. Remember, read my lips, no new taxes.
That's not going to happen here. At my stage of the game, I'm not going to Washington to kind of get along necessarily. I want to make sure that we talk about real issues, and that you're not necessarily always going with the flow. And one thing I can tell you, the federal government's got plenty of revenue. They need to know how to discipline themselves to live within their means so that they'd have the ability down the road, once they would ever get in the black with a balanced budget, to do things like infrastructure. In the meantime, President Trump can see that with the limited resources they have, he's going to need to get help from the states and his proposal was a 50-50 matching program. We'll be the envy of the country because we might actually be able to take advantage of it because we did the right thing for long-term infrastructure.
In Indiana, manufacturing is king. We have the most manufacturing jobs anywhere in the country. And then comes this tax cut law that the president signed in hopes that more manufacturers will take advantage of that and come bring jobs back home. Companies are, in some cases, are giving back bonuses. Was that tax plan enough? There's some criticism that the plan really is benefiting the people that are well off and not really the mom and pops that it claims to
I take exception with that. I thought that was going to be the case because when the plan came through, first of all, when anybody can keep more of their own money, I think it's better than government spending it, whether it's business or individuals. I think that's been the basic problem with our federal government. And taxes have gotten so high, and even with all that revenue, before they cut taxes, still spending more with all that revenue. Here, at least, it's taking it down to a level that I think will energize enterprisers, manufacturers, logistics companies like mine to keep more of their own money. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us with lower federal taxes that we invest it wisely and make sure everybody benefits from it. The number of companies that have increased wages, done things with their 401k plans or their health care plans in advance of it, no one has felt that benefit at the business level until April 15th, when our estimated payments will be lower. I think you're going to see energy unleashed like we haven't seen since the Reagan years. I don't think that even with that, we'll be able to probably fully rein in Washington living beyond its means. It's going to take like what most of us in the real world have to do, and that's prioritize your spending. And I think we'll actually have a revenue increase, but I think at the spending levels we've currently got, we're going to need to go to town on that too.
So you would have voted for this plan? If you were in the Senate today, you would have voted?
For the tax bill?
Yes.
Yes, not the omnibus spending bills,
not the omnibus,
but the tax bill,
yes.
Because I believe it's the basic principle of conservatism. Let people keep more of their own money, including businesses, and it's going to be a better result. I do think it's incumbent upon businesses now to spend it in a right way to where everybody shares in the benefit.
If the people of Indiana say, yes, we want to hire you and send you to Washington in January, obviously you can't do everything you want to do in day one or week two. But what are the 2 things or 3 things that you see as your priorities based on what you know today? Obviously the world can change tomorrow and next week, but based on what you know today at this moment, what would be your priorities if you were in that Senate chamber in January of 2019?
Okay, we've got 3 things I'd really like to see done. I think the border security issue we've talked about, I won't belabor that. I think where we're headed to do that, we're going to get all kinds of benefits that are going to affect the economy and people that have been in limbo in terms of their status and all that stuff. The 2 things that we have not gotten done is we've got to repeal and replace Obamacare to where we get something out there for folks that I think people value their family's health and their education as 2 top priorities. And in my own business, 10 years ago, it got to be where the litany of insurance companies saying you're lucky it's only going up 5% or 10%. Got tired of it. So I had to, within the meager tools that are out there, devise a health care plan for my employees that was going to be sustainable to where they weren't going to have to pay more into it just to be part of a health care plan, to where they accept some responsibility for their own well-being to prevent and live well, where we make sure we cover them when they really get sick or have a bad accident. We did everything and threw the kitchen sink at it, and I'm happy to say that we've controlled our costs. And in terms of my employees paying in for access to insurance, hasn't cost a nickel more in 9 years. They've also gotten into the idea of shopping around for health care, owning their own well-being, things that need to be done at the federal level and that other employers need to do through employer-provided insurance. The other thing that I think government's got to do, along with defending the country at the federal level, is make sure our infrastructure is healthy. We talked about that earlier. I'm on a couple groups in southern Indiana that are trying to improve our own local and regional infrastructure. And I was part of, as a state legislator for 3 years, did some work there. So I think I can go into the Senate, hit the ground running. The big difference will be on all this stuff, I won't need to be briefed on it. I mean, I've lived these things in the real world. My two competitors in the race, they've been seeing it through the lens of a politician and don't have that real world experience. I call it conservatism as a politician, conservatism living it in the trenches.
Mike Braun, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Best of luck to you. Make sure that everyone votes
Yep.
for the May primary.